Okay, so we're here to talk about Suetonius. As I said earlier, Suetonius begins with a very short biography of Octavian. He goes into his lowly origins, but he doesn't take long, and you'll notice that Suetonius is short in every single way. Seems to be missing quite a lot of detail. After that, we go into this section, which I have termed vengeance. That's not from Suetonius himself. There are a few things I want to point out. We know from Res Gestae, he never talks about civil war, does he? He talks about factions and pirates and people making war on Rome. However, Suetonius talks about numerous civil wars: Mutina, Philippi, Perusia, which we'll study next, Sicily, which you're going to find out about, and Actium. Spoiler alert, this is where Mark Antony's fleet is completely destroyed, okay? He says that the first of these were against Antonius, Marcus Antonius, then Brutus and Cassius, and then Lucius Antonius, Mark Antony's brother. That's going to be the Perusian War. And then finally against Sextus Pompey, who is the son of Pompey the Great, who was Julius Caesar's enemy. These we will study in the future. He says, the initial reason for these wars was this, and he basically says that it was vengeance against his uncle's death. Notice Suetonius calls him his uncle and not his father, which is quite interesting, isn't it? Yeah? And it points out that immediately that Octavian comes on the scene, he tries to surprise Brutus and Cassius by taking up arms against them. Now let's remember, in the actual chronology, he hopes to work with Mark Antony, doesn't he? But actually, it doesn't work out. But what I think is really important here is that in Res Gestae, he is always talking about law, isn't he? And how he followed the law and how he defends the Republic. But notice here, you see a different pattern, which is violence comes before law. First, he tries to kill them, to hurt them, to overcome them through physical strength, doesn't he? When that fails, then he turns to law, he resorts to law. Now, I think you're going to see that this is part of a pattern. Now, early Octavian, I think, is a warlord. He's steeped in blood and violence. And what's so interesting is to use Suetonius to contrast with Res Gestae, where he always presents himself as a kind of official peacemaker, okay? What's interesting here, because we don't get very much in this account, is we do get the victory gains for Caesar. That's really important because Suetonius doesn't tell us much, but we know that those games are key, and they were key because Octavian could raise his public profile, couldn't he? And he also had that beautiful event, which was the comet, which allowed him to use his fantastic piece of propaganda, which was that he is Diva Filius, that he is son of a god. It's so successful that even Cicero refers to him as Diva Filius at a particular stage in his writings, okay? Then he announced his candidature for the position of one of the tribunes of the people. That's interesting, but look at the dark side of it, okay? He was not of the right class, and he was he was a patrician and not yet a senator. Now that conflicts with everything he says in Res Gestae. In Res Gestae he says, I always follow the customs of Rome. Well, that's not true. There's a term that you need to get to know, it's called cursus honorum. And basically what cursus honorum is the idea of a hierarchy. At the top we know you get the consuls, okay? Down here you get the quaestors, etc. And you are meant to go slowly up. What do we know about Augustus? Does he go slowly up? No, he doesn't. So he ignores the cursus honorum. He's always trying to get accelerated promotions. And we know that extraordinarily, he becomes a consul at the age of 19, okay? Then he goes on to talk about the fact that he wanted to kill Antony. This is very interesting. We know that Antony was actually very unkind to him. We know that he doesn't give him his inheritance, and that he refuses to see him, don't we? But notice here it says that Antony wanted a heavy bribe, and he refuses to give this, and then he resorts to force of arms, okay? So you see again the same pattern that I wanted to say, that young Octavian is not averse to using military force whenever he can. Now notice this, guys, even more so. This is chapter 10, number 3. According, at the advice of certain men, he hired assassins to kill Antony. And when the plot was discovered, fearing retaliation, he mustered veterans. Now that makes him sound quite underhanded, don't you think? That he actually went and he is breaking the law, isn't he? He's trying to use like targeted murder, assassination. Again, very different from the image that we get in Res Gestae, showing a pattern of using force and using money, not using the normal legalistic mechanisms that he's always claiming that he does. And then it says that he is put in command of an army which he had raised. Well, Suetonius is supporting Res Gestae there, isn't he? I don't think Suetonius is entirely accurate there. What do you guys think? You know that Cicero helps him with this, don't you? You know that the Senate helped to fund this army. And again, it just reminds you to be a little bit skeptical of Suetonius. It's almost like he might be reading Res Gestae and taking it a little bit too seriously. So just to remind you, in terms of this exam that you're going to do, AO2 is when you argue. And a very important part of AO2 is evaluating the sources. And one of the best ways of evaluating the sources is to look at them and then to look at rival accounts and to try to see which one is more convincing. I would suggest that raising an army at 19 is not very convincing. There's a lot of help there, and that Suetonius on this occasion is backing the propaganda of Augustus. Yes, he does get the rank of praetor, we know that, but notice this, Suetonius tells us that it's rumored that he may have killed Hirtius and Pansa. Now, this is just a rumor. Do we take it seriously? Well, I think we've got to be careful, because we all know there have been rumors about us that may not have been true, or may be true. However, it shows that people thought quite poorly about Octavian at the time. For them to think that he was capable of killing both of the consuls suggests that his early reputation was one of being very bloodthirsty, doesn't it? Yeah? Now, we were talking earlier about that this bit is quite confusing, because Antony writes that Octavian was a coward, okay? That he ran away, that he returned without a cloak and his horse, which is obviously a disgrace for a Roman commander. Is this true? Well, look at Suetonius' source. It's Antony. We haven't studied the part that you're going to study next, which is how Antony and Octavian hate each other and launch a propaganda war. But this is like believing your frenemy, isn't it? And so I would be very careful about taking this too seriously. Then Suetonius adds, though, well, that's one version, but then he came back. And in the thick of the fight, when the eagle bearer of his legion was sorely wounded, he shouldered the eagle and carried it. So there's a pattern, just like Philippi, isn't there? Do you remember in Philippi, day 1, battle 1, he's absent. He has to go and have a little lie down in his tent. Do you remember that? But then apparently in battle 2, he comes back. Well, in this one again, he redeems himself by carrying the eagle. Do we believe it, class? We have to be very skeptical, I think, of all of these. It's very hard to know what the actual facts were. I think the key thing, though, is to notice at this stage in his career, as an imperator, as a general, he doesn't have a great reputation. And I think I'm going to stop it there and move on to the next paragraph. Right, this one is bad reputation, okay? We already talked about how Hirtius lost his life. I just want to say a few more things about this, okay? We know that Pansa died and that the physician Glyco was imprisoned on the charge of having applied poison to his wound. Again, I'd caution us believing this, because quite often, obviously, people would die of their wounds. And it was often the case that Roman physicians would then be blamed for them, okay? And it goes on to say that it was claimed that he killed the consul Hirtius himself. I don't think that we should take it too seriously, but what does it show? It shows that he had a bad reputation at this particular time, a reputation for bloodthirstiness, etc. Very different from the noble young lad in Res Gestae who does everything above board, okay? And I think this one I'm really going to concentrate on. This is chapter 12. When he learned Antony, after his flight, had found a protector in Marcus Lepidus, and that the rest of the leaders and armies were coming to terms with them. Well, it sounds like Octavian changes and just looks to see which is the stronger side. He abandoned the cause, and look at the language that Suetonius uses, without hesitation. What does that show us? It shows us that he has no moral scruples at all, that he changes sides conveniently. This is not the young man of principle avenging his father. This is a ruthless Roman warlord who is prepared to do whatever it takes to get to the top. And why is this important? Because on the whole, Suetonius is nice about Augustus. But even he, when he researches his early life, is quite negative about him. And he says here that when he changes from the nobles, that of course is the Senate and Cicero, and we know he's going to go on to be one of the prescribers, isn't he? One of the people who Cicero prescribed, decapitated with his tongue cut out, etc. It sounds like he's got quite a flimsy excuse. It says, asserting that some had called him a boy, while others had openly said that he ought to be honoured and got rid of. Now this is interesting because this is based on this charge that Cicero said, we will ennoble the boy, we will raise the boy, and then when we need to, we'll get rid of him, allegedly. Once again, Suetonius says that this is an assertion. So it doesn't mean truth. It sounds like, once again, that Octavian will change very easily and very readily, and he will change sides enormously, okay? And it says here, the necessity of making him suitable recompense. Well, did they not want to pay him? The evidence seemed to be that the Senate had paid him for the armies. And so we might say that that seems like quite a stretch. Moving on to the next page. To show more plainly that he regretted his connection with the former party, that is the Senate, what did he do? He imposed a heavy fine on the people of Nursia and banished them from the city. So I want you just to think of what this actually means. The people of Mercia accepted him and went on his side. He arrived with the armies of the Senate, didn't he? Then he changed, and what did he do to the people of Nursia? He punished them for supporting him. So what does that tell you? It tells you that he is a treacherous man. How on earth could they be blamed for supporting him and then he changes sides and he takes it out on them, yeah? And it says here, when they were unable to pay, again, it sounds like he's always after money. Why is he always after money? Because he wants military power. He needs the money to raise legions, doesn't he, yeah? And he says, because they'd had at public expense erected a monument to the citizens who were slain in battle at Mutina and inscribed upon it, they fell for liberty. So I just want to remind you, now he says, this is terrible. You're on the side of the Republicans and Brutus, etc., and the Senate. But when he arrived, he was on that exact side, wasn't he? So it shows, I think, that he's unreliable, that he's cruel, and that he changes at will. Okay, so I'm calling this section Ruthless Warlord because, once again, I'm trying to contrast with Res Gestae, and I'm trying to model at how you can use Suetonius to undermine that account we know from Augustus that was written much later towards the end of his life, as you know. Don't forget, Res Gestae was sent all around the Roman Empire, to the Middle East, to Turkey, to Africa, etc. And it was a giant wall, wasn't it, where all people could read about it. So it's best to think about it as propaganda, isn't it? Here we're told that he formed his league with Antony and Lepidus. Remember, without hesitation, he changes so quickly. Once again, at the Battle of Philippi, we're told that he was weakened by illness. Now, there's quite a few accounts of this, so this is corroborated by other historians. And it reminds you, doesn't it, that his reputation in battle was a real problem. And that is going to be a problem for him that he solves by having a really good, tough friend called Agrippa. And we'll find out more about him. So we know that there was this allegation about killing Hirtius and Pansa, but look at his reputation now for cruelty. It said he did not use his victory with moderation, but after sending Brutus's head to Rome to be cast at the feet of Caesar's statue, he vented his spleen. Now I want to contrast this with his father/uncle, Julius Caesar, who when he went to Egypt was given the head of Pompey. And instead of celebrating, he wept and he punished the Egyptians and he said, "How dare you treat a Roman like this?" Now this shows a very different character, doesn't it? It shows that he is bloodthirsty, vengeful, scornful, and that Romans are supposed to treat each other with respect. He certainly doesn't do this. We're told that Mark Antony behaves in a very different way. So I think in this passage of Suetonius, Mark Antony comes across as a man of far more clemency, far more mercy. Now I just want you to think back to Res Gestae, about how I spared the lives of all captives. Do you remember that phrase that's in Res Gestae? Well, this absolutely contradicts it. And we get two horrific stories that you can always quote in your essays. One, a man begged humbly for his burial, and Octavian says, "The birds will soon settle that question." Now this is terrible, because the Romans were not meant to desecrate bodies. They were meant to actually bury people properly who died in battle. And here Octavian is saying, let the scavengers eat your flesh. Now this is terrible because, like a lot of cultures, they believe that the body you die with is the body that you'll take to the underworld. So if you think about it, it seems unnecessary, cruel, it seems really horrible, and it seems like a very different Octavian than the one that we read about in Res Gestae. Even worse, imagine this, guys. At the end of the battle, you've got a father and a son, each of them asking for the other to be spared. It's a lovely scene, isn't it? Can you imagine the father asking for the son to be spared, the son asking for the father to be spared? And then what does Octavian do? He makes them play Mora, which is a dice game of chance. He goes, "Well, let's see who wins," to decide which should be spared. And then to have looked on while both died, since the father was executed because he offered to die for the son, and the latter thereupon took his own life. Well, that doesn't sound like a man of clemency. That doesn't sound like a man who spares the lives of captives. It sounds sadistic, doesn't it, and cruel. And notice that Mark Antony is considered different. Because of this, the rest, including Marcus Favonius, the well-known imitator of Cato. I wanted to tell you who Cato was. Cato was one of the most famous Romans ever. He was known for morality, never taking a bribe, being very, very moral. And when Julius Caesar said to him, "Come over to my side and I won't hurt you," Cato slit his wrists and died and said, "I would rather die than be with a scumbag like you." So Cato was known as being incredibly moral. And this guy, Favonius, looked up to Cato, and he actually treated Antony with respect. So what does that show you? It shows you that Mark Antony's reputation was better with captives. He was seen as a more honorable victor, and that Octavian was seen as a hideous person to actually surrender to. Then, coming to the end, when the duties of administration were divided after the victory, Antony undertook to restore order in the east. We know that he will travel to Egypt and to the beautiful arms of Cleopatra. And Augustus led the veterans back to Italy. And I've said before, that is not such a great task. There's no woman waiting for him in Italy. In fact, they're just loads of hungry, angry people. And so we're going to stop there, and I'm going to sum up the situation. Antony's going to the east. It's still richer, and there are fewer problems. Octavian's returning to Rome. He's got angry, hungry troops who want land and they want money. In the meantime, Italy has been robbed and taxed. It's without money. Famine is around the corner, and things are looking very bad for Octavian. In fact, he's been given an impossible task at this point.